recording. All right, so we're now recording this session. Our goal today is our goal this week, Module 4, is to get into the U.S. Constitution. Remember that the U.S. Constitution is that basic document, that core document, a fundamental document that essentially divides power in the country. Remember, we said that politics is about power. We said that power is the ability to influence choice. We say that the choices that matter are those uh, uh, that affect the allocation of scarce resources. And we say that scarcity produces conflict because you cannot reach maximum satisfaction. Scarcity means no one is going to get maximum satisfaction. That means everyone is going to want more than they got. And that means that people are going to be brought into conflict with each other. So when we say that politics is about power, essentially we are saying that you are studying the nature of conflict, the nature, of conflict. So we're going to walk into the Constitution next class, but I wanted to make sure we put some, as that guy said on the talk show, right, the radio show, we're going to put some respect on it. We're going to put some respect on it. And before we walk into the Constitution, we're going to read not only the Declaration of Independence, and not only look at the historic antecedents to the Constitution, of which you'll see in the slides, but we want to make sure that we read some of the Federalist Papers. And really, to get our arms wrapped around the Constitution, we need to read Federalist number 51. Now, I'm having fun teaching from home because I got my books with me. Having my books with me is kind of like, I'm about to go into battle and I've got all my tools, right? So remember, I brought to you Richard Hofstadter's book, The American Political Tradition. And Hofstadter tells us that the framers of the Constitution are hostile to democracy. In the earlier recording, I tell the class how I one day met my favorite historian, Lerone Bennett Jr. Remember that Lerone Bennett Jr. was the most well-read historian in Black America, because Lerone Bennett Jr. was the House historian who had a column in Ebony magazine, and in the 60s through the 80s, Ebony magazine was well read in Black households. And so Lerone Bennett Jr. has some things to say for us about the Declaration of Independence. Watch the earlier video. I went line by line looking at the Declaration of Independence. Now let's look at the legacy of the Declaration and Thomas Jefferson. I'm going to do some things I don't normally do just to have fun with it. I'm reading. This book here is called Before the Mayflower. When is this book published? I want to say in the 80s. Nope. This book is first published in 1962. This book is published in, I'm not going to turn around, 1962. So I'm reading to you here. I'm on page 57. I'm in the chapter called, this chapter is called The Founding of Black America, but I'm on page 57. He's waxing philosophic about the Declaration of Independence. I'm reading to you. Lerone Bennett Jr. tells us the first stage began with the first act of the Revolution. Excuse me, when the colonists, in incredible audacity, on July 4th, 1776, issued a Declaration of Independence, blandly observing, I got my glasses on, I can't even see good, blandly observing that all men were entitled to liberty, that slaves poured out their feelings in vehement protestation, seemingly oblivious to the fact that the Declaration condemned them first of all and most of all, the colonists. The slave owner, Thomas Jefferson, foremost among them, scattered 4 revolutionary seeds to the 4 corners of the earth, saying, 1, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with natural and inalienable rights that no man can bestow or take away. 2nd, that to secure these rights, men create civil communities and civil authorities who derive their just power from the consent of the governed. 3rd, that members of the community are colleagues and not subjects, and that legitimate government consists in the dominion of equal laws applied equally in the dominion, in short, of of people over themselves, and not in the dominion of communities over communities or groups over groups. And fourth, that when governments are destructive of these ends, as evidenced by bad faith, where your declaration says a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object, it is the duty of citizens to alter or to abolish these governments. Remember, we see social contract theory, popular sovereignty, Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau in the Declaration of Independence. Lerone Bennett Jr. concludes the crystallization of these ideas in the Declaration of Independence enclosed the white colonists in a net of their own making and made black freedom an inevitable corollary to white freedom. This became almost immediately clear to colonists like Thomas Paine and James Otis, who denounced both English tyranny and slaveholder tyranny. Thomas Paine, in the first recording, we make mention that Thomas Paine is seen as the father of the American Revolution through his writings in the pamphlet Common Sense. Lerone Bennett Jr. tells us here, Paine said slavery was no less immoral than murder, robbery, lewdness, and barbarity. Let me skip forward. I got another point for you. So here our discussion is about the Declaration of Independence, and we get ready to move into the Federalist number 51. Talking about the Declaration, to talk about the Declaration is to talk about Thomas Jefferson. Here, okay, I'm in chapter 6. I'm on page 141 of Lerone Bennett Jr.'s book. Stay with me. Lerone Bennett Jr. talking about Thomas Jefferson said, let's start here. Before old age downed him, he had spoken the language of desperation and death, saying this is a reprieve only, not a final sentence. Jefferson added, this momentous question, this is in quotations, this momentous question, like a fire bell ringing in the night, awakened me and filled me with terror. What's the question? It's talk slavery. Lerone Bennett Jr. continues. The old man was talking about the Missouri Compromise, a thing of lines and words, and slavery, a thing of words and compromises. The old man, speaking of Thomas Jefferson, knew whereof he spoke, for he was involved in the compromise that he, more than anyone else, had made possible. He had, when his blood was hot, put words on paper. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. These are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Lerone Bennett Jr. continues. He, meaning Jefferson, had written these words in a room in Philadelphia when he was 33, now in another room, in another age, 50 years to the date after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson, the sage of Monticello, the architect, the philosopher, the slaveholder, lay dying in a house filled with rare books and old slaves. All his life he had wrestled with the awful presence of his slaves and the noble sound of his words, and he had gone down in defeat. He was not a small man, and his defeat gives no man joy. In him, meaning Jefferson, was the strength and the weakness of America. He died, Jefferson died on July 4th, 1826, and went to his grave born by slaves. This is a good book. I'm going to pull from another book for you. We're getting ready to talk about James Madison's Federalist number 51. This is the classic Howard Zinn, A People's History of the United States. Let's turn our attention to, where are we? Let's go. Now we're talking about the Federalist Papers, right? We're on page 96. Boy, oh boy, I don't want any of my papers to fall out, but let me just show you where we are, right? We're getting ready to do Federalist number 51. Let's talk about the Federalist Papers to let Howard Zinn tell us a little something. All right, I'm on page 96. Okay, it came time, Zinn tells us, it came time to ratify the Constitution, to submit to a vote in state conventions with approval of 9 of the 13 required to ratify it in New York, where debate over ratification was intense. A series of newspaper articles appeared anonymously, and they tell us much about the nature of the Constitution. I agree. These articles favoring adoption of the Constitution were written by Madison, Hamilton, and John Jay, and they came to be known as the Federalist Papers. Madison argued that representative government was needed to maintain peace in a society ridden by factional disputes. These disputes came, quote, the various and unequal distribution of property. Those who hold and those who are without property have ever formed distinct interests in society. End quote. Zen continues. The problem, he said, was how to control the factional struggles that came from inequalities in wealth. Came from what? Inequalities in wealth. Zen continues. Minority factions could be controlled, he said, by the principle that those decisions would be by vote of the majority. So the real problem, according to Madison, was a majority faction. And here the solution was offered by the Constitution to have an extensive republic. That is, a large nation ranging over 13 states. I'm gonna skip down a little bit. Yeah. Here we go. A part of his argument, I'm on page 97 of Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. Zinn says, as part of his argument for a large republic to keep the peace, Madison tells quite clearly in the Federalist Papers whose peace he wants to keep. Quote, a rage for paper money and an abolition of debts, for an equal division of property, or for any other improper or wicked object will be less apt to pervade the whole body of the Union than a particular member of it, end quote. Here's the kicker point I really wanted you to hear. Zinn tells us when economic interest is seen behind the political clauses of the Constitution, then the document becomes not simply the work of wise men trying to establish a decent and orderly society, but the Constitution becomes the work of certain groups trying to maintain their privileges while giving enough rights and liberties to enough of the people to ensure popular support. And he continues in this vein. That's a good book. So now let's turn our attention. This week we're talking about the Constitution. In order to talk about the Constitution, we have to understand where the Constitution comes from. Like I said earlier today, if I wanted to understand some of you in here, Fowler, Stansbury, if I really wanted to get to know you folks, I might ask you a couple of questions. But what I really would do is I would call your parents, get to know your people, get to know your grandparents, call up uncle this and aunt that, right? Because you do not come to this world in and of yourself. You come to this world being socialized by coming through a particular family. So if you want to get to know the Constitution, you have to get to know the antecedent events, right? We read the Federalist Papers because the Federalist Papers occurred during the debate of the Constitution ratification debate, and you have the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists pushing against each other in order to pushing against each other, period. And in so reading this activity, we get an idea of what the Constitution is designed to do. Let's turn our attention to Federalist 51 for this discussion. Got it, Parker, got it. All right, so let's go here. Now, you could read the whole thing, right? But for the interest of time, I've identified a few points here. Let's start our discussion here with Madison's read, with our read of Madison, where Madison says, justice is the end of government, full stop. What, according to Madison here, is the of government? Justice. For whom, though? Madison says it is the end of civil society. It ever has been and ever will be pursued until it be obtained or until liberty be lost in the pursuit. What is the purpose of government? To pursue justice. For whom, though? In a society under the forms of which the stronger faction can readily unite and oppress the weaker, anarchy may as truly be said to reign as in a state of nature. What? A state of nature. Who? Put this in the chat box, please. Which British philosopher in 1651 wrote this book called The Leviathan, which he said life before government is life in a state of nature? J.R. King, Page, P.J. Skinner, Carter, Elena, Tevon, Rouse, Dylan, you're right. Hobbes says this, right? So we see Madison using a Hobbesian concept to talk about why the Constitution is relevant. Remember, the first line from this Hofstadter book that I brought to you was, that he said long ago, a historian has observed that the Constitution is based on the philosophy of Hobbes. This is, now remember, James Madison is called the father of the Constitution because Madison brings to the Constitution, as we will see in a second, separation of powers, checks and balances. He helps write the Bill of Rights, and James Madison during the Constitutional Convention is taking notes, so we know what's going on during the Constitutional Convention. I feel like something just banged. Maybe it's the ghost of James Madison. I don't want to be visited by the ghost of James Madison because James Madison was a slaveholder and I don't know who he think I am, right? All right. All right, let's keep going. Madison says anarchy may as truly be said to reign as in a state of nature where the weaker individual is not secured against the violence of the stronger. Here you see him arguing against the democracy because the stronger faction, he's talking about numeric, numbers, where the majority of the people are, the weaker, that's going to be the elites, the upper classes and such. And so if the stronger, the masses are able to tell the elites what to do, then you're going to have anarchy, just like you would have in a state of nature where the weaker people, talking about numeric disadvantages, or the wealthy, is not secure against the violence of the masses. What then is the purpose of government according to Madison and Federalist 51? Justice, where justice is where the goal of this justice is to secure the weaker against the violence of the stronger, or to secure the wealthy against the redistributive claims, which is a form of economic violence of the masses that are poor. Here, let's go to the second point. In a single republic, I think that is a fundamental thing to say, because when we go into the Constitution, we're going to read the preamble, and in the preamble, the Constitution says, "We the people." That means a singular, unified citizenry, which is different from, the citizens of New York and the citizens of Virginia and the citizens of Massachusetts using their statewide identities primarily. The goal of the Constitution is to gather all of those independent colonists and mold them into a central government in a way better than the Articles of Confederation did it. So he says, in a single republic, all the power surrendered by the people is submitted to the administration of a single government. Do you see then your Rousseau, where popular sovereignty means that the people give up some of their power to allow a government to exist, with the purpose which is to secure the rights of the majority of the people. Excuse me. So the power is surrendered by the people, submitted to the administration of a single government, and usurpations are guarded against by a division of the government into distinct and separate departments. Why do you want to divide your government into departments or branches? Madison here says to guard against usurpation of the rights of the people. So Madison says, in a compound republic, the power surrendered by the people, popular sovereignty, Rousseau, is first divided into two distinct governments, and then the portion allotted to each is subdivided amongst distinct and separate departments. Madison says, in a compound republic. In a compound republic. I wonder if, when he says a compound, that you have multiple layers of government on top of each other. The purpose of dividing or making the government have multiple layers is to guard against the government abusing the rights of the people. Remember, I don't know if you folks know this, folks might be young, but years ago, decades ago, the McDonald's commercial used to sing their way into a Big Mac. The song used to go something like this, right? 2 all beef patty, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun, something like that, right? So if you've got a Big Mac where you have 2 all beef patties, pow, pow, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions, and all of that in between a sesame seed bun, not only do you have a Big Mac, you have a compound sandwich. A compound sandwich. Well, for Madison, the compound republic is, you're going to have the legislative branch, the executive branch, the judicial branch. You're going to divide that legislative branch into the House and in the Senate. You're going to divide the House and the Senate into numerous committees. You're going to have the presidency divided into departments and agencies. Each of those department and agencies are going to have a separate leadership function, and you're going to have the Supreme Court in particular divided into separate justices, each with their own governing philosophies. And then on top of that, you're going to put independently minded states, and then on top of that, you're going to put the rights of the American people. That's what we mean by a compound republic. Hence, back to Federalist 51, a double security arises to the rights of the people. The different governments will control each other, and at the same time, each will be controlled by itself. That then is why you have checks and balances. Why are there checks and balances? To secure the rights of the people by making sure that the government is structurally designed to control itself. Let's go to the next point. Stick with me. Pusha T wrote that rhyme. Did I mention a rhyme? Oh, tomato beef patties, huh? Really? Yeah. All right. Now let's go to this fourth point, right? And we're talking about separation of powers here. All right. So Madison says, Federalist 51, in order to lay a due foundation for that separate and distinct exercise of the different powers of government, right, 3 branches, which to a certain extent is admitted on all hands to be essential to the preservation of liberty. Why do you have 3 branches of government? To preserve liberty. Madison says it is evident that each department should have a will of its own, right? So the legislature should be able to do what it wishes. The executive branch and the judicial branch should each be, he says the word will here, so they should have the power, the volition to act on their own. Madison continues, and consequently should be so constituted that members of each should have as little agency as possible in the appointment of the members of the others. We see this at work in the Constitution in the U.S. Is the president chosen by the House and the Senate? No, unless there's a tie in the Electoral College. Does the president choose the members of the Senate? Does the president choose the House? He does not. So that's what we mean. Madison says here, members of each should have as little agency as possible in the appointment of the members of the others, right? Supreme Court, something else happens. Let's move on to the next point. I don't want to talk forever about this, but I am enjoying myself. Madison in Federalist 51 says, it is equally evident that the members in each department should be as little dependent as possible on those of the others for the emoluments annexed to their offices. What's an emolument? We're talking about salaries and paychecks or money. So Madison here says that the separation of powers should be such that while technically the House pays the president, right, because the House controls, or at least initiates revenue bills, that's true, but in particular, the House does not say to the president, if you don't do a good job, I'm going to dock your pay. The president does not have the ability to tell the Senate, hey, I'm going to take money out of your pocket if you don't vote for my bill, right? And the judicial branch remains independent because their paychecks are guaranteed because they have a job for life, thereby allowing the Supreme Court to be supposedly freed from the ever-changing whims of the electorate and the American people, right? And so Madison explains, were the executive magistrate, the president, or the judges not independent of the legislature in this particular, then their independence in every other would be merely nominal. If you could pay a guy, then you could tell that guy what to do. So he says that, if they're not financially independent, then they would have no independence at all. Next point, Madison's Federalist 51. He says, the great security against a gradual concentration of the several powers in the same department consists in giving those who administer each department the necessary and constitutional means and the personal motives to resist encroachments of the others. Remember, we are saying that politics is about power, and power is the ability to influence choice. He is in that line here. He is telling us that the president should be motivated to lay claim to power. The pool of power that comes from the Constitution is finite. It is limited. So when the president tries to claim power, he is taking power away from the legislative branch. That sentence there says also that the legislative branch should be jealously and ambitiously contending for power. When the legislature tries to get power, though, it is by definition taking power away from the president and from the courts. And so here you see that the goal, rather, he talks about the constitutional and the personal motives. If the president wants to claim power, then he's got to check the power of Congress. If Congress wants to claim power, he's got to they've got to check the power of the president. So this back and forth, then, this balance of powers, or these checks and balances, are essentially how the government is in competition with each other, a competition that is to secure the rights of the American people. Madison continues. The provision for defense must in this, as in all other cases, must be made commensurate to the danger of the attack. You see me here saying classic phrase. Let me say it this way. This not only is going to be on your test, but you'll probably find this throughout the semester. This is going to be in the final exam. In Federalist 51, James Madison says famously, ambition must be made to counteract ambition, 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 ambition. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. That the legislative branch wants as much power as it can, but it's going to have to take that power away from the president. The president, knowing that the Congress wants power, tries to take power away from them. The ambitions of one are checking the ambitions of the other. That the legislative branch's ambitions are checked by the president, and the potential ambitions are checked by the legislature. And then with my third hand, you got the courts in there trying to lay claim to their powers as well. Extended quote coming. Let's keep reading. The interests of the man must be connected with the constitutional rights of the place. It may be a reflection on human nature that such devices should be necessary to control the abuses of government. Yes, we are absolutely, the constitutionalists, are absolutely saying something about human nature, right? Now, remember, the quote from this book is that the Constitution is based on the philosophy of Hobbes, but the end of that quote is to say it's also based on the religion of Calvin, the notion that people are born in sin, the notions of human evil and damnation, and the need for salvation, right? So if people are born in sin, are just beset by damnation just at the moment of birth, think about that, right? Where he says, what is maybe a reflection on human nature that such devices should be necessary to control the abuses of government. But what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections of human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. Are men angels? The Constitution says no. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. Well, angels do not govern men, so internal and external controls on government are necessary. So Madison continues. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in this next place oblige that government to control itself. According to James Madison in Federalist 51, why do you have separation of powers? Because you need the government to control the governed, and you also need the government to control itself. Mhm. Madison continues, a dependence on the people is no doubt the primary control on the government. That is true. Popular sovereignty does exist, he's saying, but experience has taught mankind the necessity of auxiliary precautions. He said you're going to have to use something else, because the notion that the people are going to control their government through elections or something, that is essentially not going to be enough. And so that's all. There's more to say, of course, but that's all I really wanted to say in the context of Federalist number 51. Remember, we're talking in Federalist 51. Madison famously says ambition must be made to counteract ambition. So he is saying that checks and balances, rather, he is saying that separation of powers and checks and balances are all necessary to secure the rights of the people. To secure the rights of the people. All right, that's really all I wanted to say. On Thursday, I want us to walk specifically through the U.S. Constitution, and we'll talk about, we'll do a few things antecedent to the Constitution, right? We have to talk about the Constitutional Convention. We'll do that Thursday. We have to talk about the preamble. We have to talk about the New Jersey and the Virginia plan, things I don't mind talking about at all. And then by the time I get to the 6:30 class, by the time I get to you folks, we'll be literally reading through the Constitution. All right. So I'm ready to stop talking and let you guys go. I think I expended enough energy. I was talking hard because my throat hurts. But let me offer one more cautionary point to you. Let me end the recording right here. All right. So that's